Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for
Good afternoon. Welcome. Great to see you all. Thank you for coming. I'm Ted Cacci, and Director of the Center for Italian Studies, and it's a really great pleasure to welcome you for this year's Ravarino Lecture, which is made possible through the generosity of the Albert J. and Helen M. Ravarino Family Endowment for Excellence. Each year, this series brings to Notre Dame a distinguished scholar whose work has shaped the field of Italian studies in enduring ways. And speaking of, so the list of past Ravarino lectures is, as you know, a distinguished one. Lino Pertile of Harvard, and Abigail Brunden of Cambridge, and Lucia Ray of UCLA, Peter Hawkins of Yale, William Caffaro of Vanderbilt, and Giorgio Bertolini, I think most recently from Michigan, scholars whose work has defined the contours of the conversations in our field. To that remarkable company, we add tonight a scholar who more than belongs in this group, and who, in a way, already belongs here. It's a pleasure to introduce Professor Simone Marchesi of Princeton University. PhD from Princeton University, and an MA in Italian Studies at Notre Dame. Professor Marchesi is one of the leading scholars of medieval Italian literature, working today with particular authority in Dante, Petrarch, and Boccaccio. His work is distinguished by its sustained attention to the relationship between medieval vernacular writing and the classical and late antique traditions that inform it, a relationship that he has helped us to see not as simple opposition or supersession, but as a dynamic and continuous dialogue. Simone is the author of major monographs that have become touchstones in Italian medieval literary studies. Stratigrafie decameroniane is a foundational study of narrative layering in Boccaccio, and Dante and Augustine, Linguistics, Poetics, Hermeneutics, a work that has significantly reshaped our understanding of Dante's intellectual formation and his engagement with Augustinian thought. And most recently, his book, Vernacular Edens, Toronto 2025, extends the range of his inquiry into a broader investigation of translation, cultural transmission, and the poetics of vernacular literature across medieval Europe, bringing together Italian, French, and English traditions within a single interpretive framework. Alongside these monographs, Professor Marchesi has played a major role as an editor and collaborator in shaping the field. He's co-edited important volumes such as Dante Alive, Decameron Day, Nine, and Perspective, and has contributed essays to many of the most influential collective projects in medieval studies, including the Cambridge Companion to Dante's Commedia, Vertical Readings in Dante. He's also a member of the advisory board of the series, of the Devers series in Dante and medieval Italian literature, published by the University of Notre Dame Press. Did I mention that Simone got his MA from Notre Dame? His scholarly work also extends into translation and editorial practice in particularly impactful ways. I hate that word. I should get it out of my word processor. He translated Robert Hollander's monumental commentary on the Divine Comedy into Italian. They really needed it, making one of the most important interpretations of Dante accessible to a broader readership. And he's contributed to pedagogical and annotated editions of the Commedia that are widely used in both university and secondary school contexts. And this is a really special book that he's done with a collaborator, Roberto Abbiati, an illustrator. And it's really Simone's very personal commentary on the Divine Comedy. So this is a very special book, and I wanted to circulate it as well. I should mention, though I'm not sure if this has come up yet, that he earned his MA in Italian Studies at Notre Dame. No. In addition to his scholarship, he's also an extraordinary teacher. At Princeton, he's taught everything from introductory courses to advanced seminars on Dante's Divine Comedy, as well as innovative interdisciplinary courses on monsters and the long traditions of hell in Western literature, and courses that bring students into deep engagement with the text he studies. He's also become famous at Princeton for the annual Dante reunion, which he inherited from Bob Hollander and continues, which gathers together between 30 and 50 Princeton alums every summer to discuss several cantos of Dante. Simone is also a leader in the profession. He was the president of the American Boccaccio Association. He's been a central figure in the Dante Society of America. He's a counselor several times, I think. Editor-in-chief of Dante Notes, where he's helped shape the direction of contemporary Dante scholarship. His return to campus this evening as Ravarino Lecture is therefore not only an academic distinction, but also in a real sense, a homecoming. His lecture, Doomed Ships, Allegories of Shipwrecks in Dante, Petrarch, and Boccaccio, reflects new work on navigational metaphor and literary form, work that exemplifies the originality and range and intellectual ambition that define his scholarship, as we'll see. We're delighted to welcome him back. Please join me in welcoming back Simone Marchesi.
Thank you, Ted. Oh my. Thank you. Thank you so much for, the kind, generous, intimidating introduction. So thank you, Ted. Thank you, Demetrio, for the invitation to the Ravarino family. I'm really grateful for making my visit possible today. I'm really delighted to be back to, the beautiful Notre Dame campus, back to the place where my American adventure began just about 30 years ago, but who's counting? I'm particularly honored, really, and happy to speak in front of some of the people here to whom I truly, truly owe many of the many good things that have happened to me in this country. So this is for you all. Today, I'll offer some considerations about the literary metaphor, that of the shipwreck, as it is treated by three of my favorite Italian writers of the 14th century. Before I delve into the corpus and introduce you to the guiding questions for my work, and if you don't mind, I would like to start with an anecdote. On the first day of the spring semester, in my freshman seminar on Other Hells, a course that bears the somewhat misleading subtitle, Every Other Hell But Dante's, there is Dante there, I asked students to reflect with me on the etymology of the word psychology. I started with the obvious, namely that, like every other word ending in ology, psychology is a science, in particular, the science of the psyche. So far, so good. I then asked what they think psyche is. To my surprise, and I think meaningfully, the class split into three basically equivalent groups. Some students said psychology is the science of the mind. Some said the science of the brain, some the science of the soul. Mind, brain, soul. These three elements are relevant to my talk because they encapsulate three related and yet diverging aspects of the psychological and anthropological discourse which underlies the use that Dante, Boccaccio, and Petrarch made of the shipwreck metaphor in their works. Each of the three grounds, as I'm about to propose, developed a precise image of the human psyche, in turn conceptualizing it as soul, as body, and as mind. They did so also by availing themselves of the metaphors of navigation that were current in their times, and by isolating in them some specific elements which were, I will argue, familiar to their immediate readers, but have largely been forgotten today. In their literary redeployments of the traditional motif of shipwreck, Dante, Boccaccio, and Petrarch activated distinct theological, biomedical, and ethical strains of that metaphor. In medieval literature, as everybody knows, there are three common and well-studied types of navigational allegories. Those used to depict the course of one's life, those employed to conceptualize the faring of the ship of state, and those adopted to present the progress of a work's writing. We're all familiar with that. In my talk, I will only concentrate on the first usage of nautical imagery, the existential one. Even within that paradigm of existential seafaring, where human life is like a journey by sea, difficult, unfolding through hostile environments, always exposed to predictably unpredictable accidents, aiming to reach safe haven at its end, I will show that medieval culture produced some specialized allegories of navigation within the general semantic field of the shipwreck trope. By recuperating and reworking classical and late antique sources, writers on theological, ethical, and medical questions discussed the sinning, parturition, and melancholic disposition in terms of shipwrecks and their aftermaths. Today, as eventually in the book that I am currently writing on this topic, my work will consist in a recovery of these interpretive elements in the tradition, what I would like to call the minority reports about psychological shipwrecks. My talk is organized in 3 movements of roughly equal length, and let me begin with the first one, the soul at sea. So our starting point is Dante's treatment of 2 imbricated episodes in the Inferno. And you all have a handout, and that's everything is going to be there, everything I'm going to cite and allude to. So 2 imbricated episodes in Inferno, which frame as physical and existential shipwrecks the actual and spiritual demise of Ulysses and Guido da Montefeltro, 2 characters that have sometimes been described as one the modern correlative of the other. In addition to having both provided false counsel, so that they occupy the same zone in the poem's moral geography, and of focusing their compendious autobiographies on the final stretch of their earthly existence, their old age, these 2 figures, are linked by Dante's use for them of maritime lore and language. For Dante's Ulysses, the navigation theme exists on the level of history, that is, of myth. For Guido, it is deployed on the level of metaphor, that is, of allegory. On the one hand, Ulysses' life ends when his navigation into the southern hemisphere of the world also ends, and his ship is submerged by a supernaturally ordained storm that prevents him from reaching the island of Purgatory. On the other hand, Guido's turn from fraudulent warmongering to living in a fraternal order is metaphorized as the last act in a prudently organized existential seafaring. What the traditional commentary to these episodes has omitted to point out, I believe, is that even the very act that condemns Guido to hell, his fraudulently set up and hence failed confession to Pope Boniface VIII, is coherent with the nautical metaphors and the nautical metaphoric substratum of the canto. And let me suggest to you why I think that is the case. We have to start from the convivio, and this is the first item on your handout. Since Dante's use of nautical language for an existential journey begins before the diptych of Inferno 26 and 27, but it is not unrelated to it. The author of Convivio explores the semantic field of seafaring and the ship-rigging lexicon upon his first mentioning of Guido da Montefeltro. He does so, famously, in the 4th book. The final trattato is devoted, as you know, to a discussion of the specific attitudes and actions that become the different stages in human life. When he reaches the virtues appropriate to old age, il senio, Dante notes, certo, lo cavalier Lanzalotto non volse in porto entrare con le vele alte, né lo nobilissimo nostro latino Guido Montefeltrano. Bene, questi nobili calarono le vele delle mondane operazioni, che nella loro lunga età di religione si rendero, ogni mondano diletto ed opera disponendo. In this passage, the metaphors of navigation are applied to the field of existential decisions. The harbor is the end of one's life, which is to say God, as the Convivio establishes in paragraph 3. The actual navigation is the individual's moral behavior, as it is reflected in their actions. The sails are the metaphoric equivalent of active life, when it is ordered to seek in pleasure, diletto, or virtue, opera. The image rests on a solid classical base established through an open citation of a passage in Cicero's De Senectute. On this allegorical background, Dante projects his invective against those who cannot or will not calibrate their existence on the passage of time, and it is here that the threat of existential shipwreck first appears. O miseri e vili, che con le vele alte correte a questo porto e là dove dovreste riposare per lo impeto del vento rompete e perdete voi medesimi là dove tanto camminato avete. As he distinctively and consistently does in the 4th book, a book in which history plays a crucial role in supporting dialectical argumentation, Dante is not content with enunciating a general principle, but he connects it to specific characters, Lancelot and Guido. The gesture toward history is not simply representative of Dante's argumentative style in the tract. It also pointedly anticipates his common practice in the Commedia, and with it, it anticipates a salient moment in the poem, when the same gamut of images reappears in an ethical existential context, linked to one of the Convivio ethical models. In one of the passages that may be featured among the most prominent revisitations and re-evaluations of the Convivio that Dante entrusts to the Commedia, the character of Guido appropriates the same maritime lexicon that Dante had used for him to provide the poem's protagonist with an account of the course of his own life. Here is Guido. Quando mi vidi giunto in quella parte di mia età dove ciascun dovrebbe calar le vele e raccoglier le sarte, ciò che pria mi piacea, allor mi increbbe, e pentuto e confesso mi rendei, ahi, misero lasso, e giovato sarebbe. Of course, the fact that Guido apparently feels no need to expound what exactly is the part of his age in which one should lower sails and gather cables, and to what kind of existential and ethical tenor these nautical vehicles truly belong, may simply be due to the traditional quality of his nautical metaphors. It is easy, that is, to decode his figurative language. I would put not it beyond Dante, however, the possibility that the deadly irony perfusing this episode may rest in part on the circumstance that Guido is doubly blind, trustingly thinking that he is disclosing his damnation to a damned soul, as T.S. Eliot will point out, and unconsciously addressing the author of the Convivio, the very text that had adopted this set of images to treat as exemplary his late conversion from warlord to Franciscan friar. But the text and its immediate context suggest perhaps more than the usefulness of glossing Dante with Dante. As we know from reading the Commedia, Guido did not really reach the port as the Convivio had posited, since, despite his initial conversion, he was rerouted by Boniface VIII, who co-opted his military acumen in order to get the upper hand in the war that he was waging against the rival aristocratic family of the Colonna. Boniface's intervention, if one were to continue the metaphor at work in this passage, precipitated Guido's final existential shipwreck. Now, in characterizing as shipwreck Guido's relapse into his old ways, the event that brought about his eventual damnation, I'm not indulging in an unwarranted expansion of Dante's own metaphors. The situation that Dante constructs in the episode, I would argue, evoked precisely that paradigm, the paradigm of shipwreck, in his early audience. Let's focus on penance and see how that goes. The last dialogue between Guido and Boniface hinges, one should remember, exactly on the sacrament of confession, of penance. To bring himself to provide the fraudulent counsel that will damn him, Dante's character relies on the insurance that the Pope gives him that he is preemptively absolved from the sin that he is about to commit. It is a guarantee that is extended to him by a character who fashions himself explicitly as a confessor. Here is Boniface, according to Guido. E poi ridisse: tuo cuor non sospetti, finor t'assolvo, e tu mi insegni a fare siccome penestrino in terra getti. Lo ciel possio serrare e disserrare come tu sai, però son due le chiavi che il mio antecessor non ebbe care. Boniface's line of argument is tragically ironic insofar as it invites Guido to suspend his disbelief in the efficaciousness of the proceedings that are about to unfold. It is also exquisitely technical, since the Pope promises the friar a blanket pardon and evokes the keys featured on the pontiff's seal. The rite of confession is more than just the occasional circumstance of Guido's damnation, thus. On the one hand, Boniface really draws attention to his own institutional and sacramental role as a mediator of divine grace. On the other hand, Guido explicitly states, in technical terms, that his own advice is given in the framework of a confession. Padre, da che tu mi lavi di quel peccato, io mo cader deggio. That's how he prefaces his counsel. That his strategy will ultimately amount to an exercise in futility, and his attempt to enunciate a contractually binding clause in the situation in which he and the Pope have entered will amount to nothing, depend, of course, on their conveniently shared forgetfulness of an element in the sacrament, namely contrition, without which absolution is impossible, since assolver non si può chi non si pente, as the devil who comes to claim Guido's soul states again in clearly sacramental terms at the end of the canto. But what does confession have to do with shipwreck? As a matter of fact, a lot. As it witnessed, and here once again the handout is going to be useful, as it is witnessed in Aquinas' Summa, the sacrament of penance could be and often was discussed in navigational terms. On the handout, I offer you some excerpts from Aquinas' text that may be useful to gloss the interaction between Guido and Boniface, beginning with the opening of the Question, which discusses whether penance may or may not be considered as a second plank after shipwreck. Thomas's distinction hinges on a technical element. The issue at hand is the discrepancy between a current definition of the sacrament of penance and several doctrinal pronouncements and considerations that seem to contradict it. Now, rather than dwelling on the variously articulated contrasting points that Thomas makes, they're really intriguing, but we don't have time for that. For my argument, it is perhaps more useful to point to the solution that he provides. When the Summa solves the issue, in fact, it does so both by confirming the theological legitimacy of Jerome's nautical formula, and to no surprise, this comes to no surprise, but also insisting on the metaphoric quality of the expression that Jerome's gloss contained. Thomas concludes, in fact, by producing a prolonged and detailed metaphor himself, and that's kind of rare for Thomas. In a neat allegorical articulation of what he labels metaphoric speech, metaphoric dicitur, I mean, this is really at the center of his articulation, and with some correspondences having been spelled out more clearly than before, we are offered here the elements that we had encountered already in both the historical and the autobiofictional accounts of Dante's imaginary Guido. To those who cross the sea of human existence, the first element of support is the ship that is safe and sound, that is, the divine grace that one has obtained through baptism. When this first vessel is ruined with the wreckage brought about by sin, a second means of salvation remains. This is the plank, confession, that a shipwrecked person is offered and to which they may hold on for dear life. So, knowing this, what do we know? With this material in mind, I believe we are in a better position to look at the character of Guido and the language that he used in connection with the immediate narrative context. A gloss that is traditionally appended to this section of Inferno 27 insists on the metaphorical continuity between the epic navigation of Ulysses and Guido's understanding of his life as a nautical course. In truth, I think there are several other elements that connect the two cantos. First, on the level of the characters' biographical fictions, both cantos include a revelation of sorts regarding to the final stage, even the final moments in the early lives of their respective protagonists. In the earthly lives, I'm sorry, not early, but earthly lives of the respective protagonists. Both episodes are also exitus texts. They are about the death of these characters. They come, the first, to fill a gap in the mythical record of Ulysses, and the second, to set the record straight about Guido's otherworldly destination. In both cases, a dynamic of revisitation of previous readerly expectations introduces an element of surprise that is involved in the intended effect of the cantos. There's another element, second element. Guido's imaginary shipwreck is not the only existential one, but is also more precisely and deeply ironically a tragic sacramental one. His confession, or better yet, the mockery of the sacrament that Boniface and he agree upon, a disconfession that matches his disconversion, proves utterly useless and fails to grant him eventual salvation. It is a quite technical vizio di forma that invalidates the proceedings, one that the black angel, the black cherub, will flaunt against none other than St. Francis, if we are to believe Guido's account. That metaphoric secunda tabula to which a repented and confessed sinner like Guido should have entrusted his soul, in conclusion, betrayed all expectation, both his own and that of his audience. End of first movement. Second movement, the body at sea. So we leave Dante behind for a moment, just for a moment. It's impossible to leave Dante behind. Let's move to Boccaccio and look in particular at the rescue scene at the center of the Cameron 2-4. The tale of Landolfo Ruffolo, a merchant turned pirate who shipwrecks off the coast of Corfu and is felicitously saved and cared for by an unnamed woman on the island. From my reading, some lexical elements will emerge that point toward the understanding of shipwreck as parturition. To account for this perhaps surprising connection, I mobilize two distinct but interrelated strains of allegorization. First, the late antique and medieval interpretation of Aeneas's shipwreck in Aeneid I as the first act in a human being's life. And then the subtle linking of childbirth and shipwreck in two distinct episodes in the life of St. Andrew, as it is narrated in the Legenda Aurea, and hence disseminated in other media. These are all text and images you have on your handout. Let's begin with Boccaccio's story itself. In line with the theme set by Filomena in the conclusion of day 1, which explicitly mentions diversi casi della fortuna, Decameron 2-4 contains a compact series of vicissitudes befalling an adventurous protagonist, which are designed to showcase the power of fortune. The plotline all revolves around several socio-economic reversals affecting Landolfo. As the rubric concisely states, Landolfo Rufolo, impoverito, divien corsale e da genovesi preso rompe in mare e sopra una cassetta di gioie carissime piena scampa e in gurfo ricevuto da una femmina ricco si torna a casa sua. Now, in the body of the tale, Lauretta elaborates on these key elements, clarifying both the prehistory of Landolfo's impoverishment and his psychological states along the way. Obviously, the theme of fortune is not without its relevance for the discourse on shipwrecks, given, se non altro, the lexical fact that in Italian the word fortuna can also mean a storm at sea, a fortunale. A reading of Landolfo's shipwreck as manifestation of fortune's power would thus be possible, but it will also be incomplete. When we zero in on the salient moment in the tale's plot, the lexicon we encounter contains some pointed allusions to the late antique and medieval moralizations of another Mediterranean shipwreck, the one recounted in Book 1 of Virgil's Aeneid, and through it, I maintain, to other exemplary and homiletic sources, all imagining shipwrecks as an allegorical equivalent of childbirth. The section of the novella to which I draw your attention opens with the aftermath of the storm that pushes the shipwrecked Landolfo toward the coast of Corfu, where he is spotted and saved by a woman who, by chance and to Landolfo's good fortune, finds herself at the right place at the right time. So you have the relevant section on your handout. I'll not read it aloud. I'll save voice, but I'll give you a moment to go over it at your own pace. Now, there are a few features worth noting in the passage. First, there is the ability the woman possesses to look and see, that is, to discern the human element in the formless shape that the waves push her way. It is this better way of seeing that propels Landolfo from the status of just one of many shipwrecked things, object, to a person worthy of humane treatment. Once the woman recognizes a fellow human being in Landolfo, the rescue operation seems to be the most natural development for the plot. But that's not all. The progressive recognition of Landolfo as human is not simply a matter of narrative suspense or ethical response. What is human in Landolfo is recognized gradually because his rescue from existential and financial shipwreck is also informed by the cultural habit of imagining a shipwreck as an archetypal equivalent of birth at sea. Such interpretations may be found in two main sources, Fulgentius and Pseudo-Bernard. Both interpretive accounts circulated widely in Boccaccio's times. Although they date from the early and the late Middle Ages, early 6th and 12th centuries, respectively, the content of the two works of commentary, of Virgilian commentary, is mostly congruent. Both Fulgentius and Pseudo-Bernard framed their reading of Virgil's text in psycho-spiritual terms. In their minds, the Aeneid contains an allegorical account of human development from biological infancy, which is figured in the plot and characters appearing in Book 1, to philosophical maturity, which is made to coincide with Aeneas' descent into the underworld in Book 6, moving through the age of love, Book 4, parental loss, Book 5. The interpretive alignment of these potential points of reference for Boccaccio's story is particularly evident in their reading of the salient moments in Aeneid 1. As Virgil the character explains in the Expositio, and I'm quoting, I, meaning Virgil, use the shipwreck symbol of our dangerous birth, since in it one finds both the mother's pangs of giving birth and the infant's danger of being born. End of quote. Fulgentius immediately buttresses his interpretation, adding that it only makes sense that Virgil's shipwreck is supposed to signify birth, since the divine agent instigating the storm is, after all, Juno, the goddess of childbirth. Bernard follows suit, adding further elements connecting the backstory of the shipwreck scene in the Aeneid with the mechanics of parturition. In the preliminary phases of the book, Virgil recounts how Juno goes to Aeolus, who's the king of the winds, to enlist his help in raising the storm that will push Aeneas' fleet towards the shores of Carthage, and promise him, Aeolus, the nymph Deiopeia, which is allegorically connected, according to Bernard, to light and heat, in marriage. Given this plot and the ensuing allegorical association, Bernard feels confident about glossing the scene in biomechanical terms. And this is another passage I'm going to quote. From these details, one can see the reason why Juno was to go to Aeolus and give him Deiopeia. Juno went to Aeolus because air facilitates childbirth through heat and moisture. And he goes on discussing the opposite effects of coldness. As a potential intertext for Decameron 2:4, the traditional interpretive paradigm of the Virgilian storm appears both pertinent and, I believe, illuminating. In the sequence of events surrounding Landolfo's rescue, there are at least 4 elements connected to the condition of infancy. The infancy paradigm is evoked by the precise definitory language used to describe the protagonist's situation. Landolfo receives the same care from his rescuer that would un piccolo fanciullo. The phrase is not simply an evocative simile, I argue. It is a technical description. The fact that the good woman in Corfu treats him as she would a small child retrogressively activates other signals in the same paragraph. In his shipwrecked condition, Landolfo is described as a sea sponge, divenuto quasi una spugna. He initially appears formless to his rescuer, non conoscendo in lui alcuna forma. He is unable to see clearly and to speak. Non poteva favellare e poco vedea. Taken together, these narrative details suggest that the protagonist has at least symbolically regressed to a state of liminal identity. Topographically, he is neither in the water nor on the ground. Existentially, he is neither alive nor dead. In gnosiological terms, he is neither fully human nor completely rendered an object. All these elements in Landolfo's description, and in particular the example of the sponge, were common currency in medieval discussions of the biological aspects of embryology and birth. You don't believe me? Believe Dante. That's the passage I will not read today, but I'll be happy to discuss during Q&A if you want to go back to Dante. Now, by looking at Landolfo's temporary life at sea through the lens of late medieval biological discourse, we may notice how his rescue recapitulates the ontogenesis of the human being. The insistence on Landolfo's apparent formlessness, his sponge-like appearance, his short-term lack of vision and speech fit the profile of an infant, as it emerges from both traditional embryology, Dante, and the allegorical reading of the Aeneid. Regarding the latter, capacity of seeing and speaking in the Aeneid, Fulgentius' gloss on Aeneas' inability to discern the features of Venus, his mother, in the woman that he sees while approaching the city of Carthage, and also his inability to speak to his comrades while shrouded in her protective cloud, seem to be on point. On your handout, once again, you have the passage. Now, what could this double literary and scientific paradigm at work in Landolfo's story tell us about Boccaccio's culture and that of his audience? Now, did Boccaccio expect his readers to be all trained classicists or expert allegorists? In a way, yes, but in a way also, no. They didn't need to have a degree in all of this. Because there is a convergent set of texts that come from a completely different tradition, in which the conceptualization of shipwreck and the semantic field of generation are also similarly prominent. The allegorical connection of shipwreck and parturition is at the core of several even more widely circulating medieval exemplary texts. As synthetic formulation of this notion, I provide you with 2 sententious passages. They come from the Copia Exemplorum by Magister Matthias, composed after 1344, and the Tabula Exemplorum, dated to the end of the 13th century. They're both, preaching manuals, preaching repertoires. Both texts assert that the instability of all human things produces an excessive alternation of elation and dejection in those who are exposed to them. In the first example, shipwreck and parturition are considered one in the light of the other. A pregnant woman conceives in pleasure and delivers in misery, just as sailors sing when the wind is favorable, but then cry when the contrary winds afflict them. In the second case, the interconnection goes, I think, even further, even deeper. The ethical comparandum, the deceiving pleasures of this world, is explained by the evocation of two comparata. First, a pregnant woman, and then sailors at sea, which are treated as ultimately interchangeable. That the trope was far from enjoying a life of marginality in Boccaccio's culture is also attested by the interplay of a final literary source and one of its late visual counterparts. In the retablo, and we are moving to the images, in the retablo of St. Andrew, an altar painting produced in the first half of the 15th century by the Master of Roussillon, it's now at the cloisters in New York, we find the illustration of several moments in the life of the apostle as they are recounted in Jacopo da Barazza's early 14th century golden legend. In the lowest register, and we are just going to talk about that, two such episodes are assigned 2 panels each, 2 formelle each. On the left, the painter has rendered visually an episode of difficult childbirth that the saint resolved once the consultation with a pagan goddess that the pregnant woman had initiated. In reality, this pagan goddess is a demon inhabiting an idol, had failed. The narrative there unfolds from left to right. You have the consultation, then you have the saint showing up in the delivery room and having the delivery happen. On the right, correspondingly, I argue, the painter depicted the miracle of a group of young faithful whom St. Andrew resurrected after a devil had sunk their ship in a storm and they all had drowned. And in the lost panel, unfortunately that panel is lost, most likely, but I would bet a lot of money on it, the shipwreck itself. The narrative should have unfolded there, again, correspondingly from right to left. In the hagiographic source, the 2 episodes that I've just described are completely unrelated. They take place in different locales and at different stages in the life of the saint. Yet the Master of Roussillon, or better, his auctor intellectualis, the Dominican patron for the work, and this is a Dominican piece, it's very clearly a Dominican piece, decides to arrange these miracles in a markedly symmetrical position. Beyond the common presence of an active devil in both, there seems to be no apparent reason for their collocation, for their dislocation. It is thus, I believe, the systemic figural interconnection of parturition and shipwreck, which we have seen at work in the late antique and medieval sources, that triggers it. This allegorical imbrication is not simply one facet of a topos seeping into the densely elusive fabric of the Decameron, but also a theme that circulated widely and did so for quite some time. We have forgotten about that, but that doesn't mean that the initial audience didn't have it very clearly in his mind. For Boccaccio's audience, the protagonist is made to re-emerge as reborn from the waters, and through the compassionate care that he receives, I believe in a technically physiological sense. Third movement, the mind at sea. And we reach Petrarch, the last element in today's triptych. His engagement with nautical metaphors is perhaps even more extensive than that of Dante and Boccaccio. As has been the case for his predecessors, however, his treatment of the trope also takes place at the crossroads of his 2 languages of culture. My whole book really is about a vernacular to Latin deep dialogue in these authors. Nautical metaphors and moments of psychological shipwreck are found across a wide variety of Petrarch's texts, extending from his consolatory letter to Giovanni Colonna in Familiares 4:2 to several passages in the Secretum, from various sonnets, sestinas, canzoni in his Rerum for Gallium Fragmenta, to the province of epic poetry in his Africa. In this final stretch of my talk, I focus on Petrarch's multi-text exploration in nautical terms of the emotion of acedia, or melancholy. In practice, I propose to read the semantic imbrication of Passa la nave mia, this is going to be the central text, with both 1. The innovative development of seafaring metaphors deployed in the Secretum to describe the effects of this spiritual ailment on the protagonist's soul. And 2, with the framing of Massinissa's soliloquy in the Africa, a moment at which the Numidian prince is faced with a choice between either marrying Sophonisba, thus following his heart, or abiding by his duty to his Roman ally, Scipio, and thus putting Sophonisba to death, a choice between, if you will, lyrical and epic codes of conduct. This peculiar triangulation connecting the psychological analysis developed in the prose of the Secretum to the exploration of the lyrical subject in the Canzoniere and the construction of an epic historical character in the Africa allows me to recover Petrarch's construction of an anthropology of psychological irresoluteness, phrased in nautical terms. This line of argument, that Petrarch's poetics was bent on constructing an unstable and contradictory subject, this is Michelangelo Piccone's wonderful definition, is of course in no way a novelty. My contribution to this widely studied theme in the literary world of Petrarch is again of a technical nature. It consists in an invitation to appreciate the purposeful and distinctive use that Petrarch makes of the shipwreck imagery in view of his construction of a specific kind of human subject, a method for a psychoanalysis in, God forbid, non-Freudian sense that will have a long-lasting influence on humanistic discourse. And I will only have one sentence about humanism at the end. Let us start with the Secretum. When pressed by Augustinus on his hopes for a long life as a reason for his always delayed conversion, Franciscus replies, as he often does, by reaching for an auctoritas. This time, he takes a nugget of ancient nautical wisdom, a passage from the Aeneid, and turns it into a systematic extended allegory of life as difficult seafaring, a navigation constantly exposed to the vexing powers of malignant fortune. You have the text on page 5 of the handout. The allegory constructed in the passage is highly detailed and heavy on the adjectives. On the deep, as well as rugged and turbulent sea of existence, the small bark of the subject, a vessel which is about to come apart and constantly leaking, is tossed by contrary winds over high waves. The subject's only hope is that the Almighty, in his infinite mercy, may allow the subject to take the helm and steer his ship with all his might, so that he may reach the shore and die in port after having lived wide at sea. What is perhaps most striking in the way the brief paragraph articulates its ethical psychological message is the absence of direct indications of what the comparanda for the detailed nautical situations may be. We have no ground to say on this side of the environment, for instance, what the sea, the winds, the waves, the shore, and the port are supposed to be in existential terms. Similarly, on the side of the vessel, we are not told explicitly what the ship, its leaking flanks, its rudder correspond to, should we want to solve the metaphor for its psychological value. We have an initial trigger, but then it doesn't follow through. Apparently, in Petrarch's text, the allegorical logic is deemed, if not self-evident, at least self-sufficient, allowing the author to dispense with orienting his reader's understanding of his own internal states. When we compare the inner workings of Petrarch's metaphoric writing with, say, the careful allegorical mapping that Dante provided in his Convivio, the absence is conspicuous. They don't work the same way. But it is not only from a comparison with Dante that the pattern of nondescript and non-committal allegorization in Petrarch's Latin prose emerges as noteworthy. His own poetry, Petrarch's own poetry, also blatantly reverses it. Most notably in Canzoniere 189, Passa la nave mia. As I mentioned before, the author of the Canzoniere shows a particular penchant for adopting nautical language in his poetry. Among the many possible relevant texts, I've chosen to concentrate on Passa la nave mia, given not only its notoriety, and then it's pretty decent sonnet, it's a pretty great sonnet actually, but also the pivotal role it played as the last poem in the In Vita section in one of the intermediate stages in the formation of Petrarch's book of poetry, the so-called Forma Chigi. A forma that has literally Boccaccio's fingerprints on it. The text deserves full quotation, so please bear with me as I lend my voice to Petrarch. Passa la nave mia colma d'oblio, per aspro mare a mezzanotte il verno, e in frascille Caribdi, et al governo siede il Signor, anzi il nemico mio. A ciascun remo un penser pronto e rio che la tempesta il fin par che abbia scherno. La vela rompe un vento umido, eterno, di sospir, di speranze e di desio, pioggia di lacrimar, nebbia di sdegni, bagna e rallenta leggia stanche sarte che son d'error con ignoranza a torto. Celansi d'uomini e dolci usati segni, morta fra l'onde e la ragione e l'arte, tal ch'io comincio a desperar del porto. When we evaluate it according to the matrix of explicit versus implicit assignment of mental correlatives, the metaphoric system constructed in the poem is striking, especially for its complexity. Terms that belong to the sphere of troubled navigation include the subject's ship, seen as it crosses a troubled sea, the ship's pilot, who steers it, while it is propelled by oars. There is an ongoing storm, with wind as well as rain, and mist testing and weakening the ship's rigging. No help from navigational points of reference is available amid the waves. No harbor is in sight. While not exhaustive, the set of psychological correspondences is, however, also rich. The ship's pilot is the subject's lord, or better yet, his enemy, a rather clear personification of Amor. We can discuss about this. The cargo, or I actually would argue the sea water flooding the ship's bilge, is the mysterious forgetfulness in line 1, l'oblio. Restless and malignant thoughts are the oarsmen. The wind consists of sighs, hopes, desires. The ship's shrouds are twisted cables made of error and ignorance. The agents who is supposed to steer the ship, reason, with its companion, art, is dead amid the waves. The sheer abundance of the imagery, together with the careful systematization of mental interconnections, holds the text in a delicate balance between the status of an articulated psychological diagnosis of the poet's self, which has rightly prompted critics to class the sonnet among those Petrarch dedicated to the exploration of melancholy. I think this is Sant'Agata, mostly. And the rhetorical construction of an irresolute lyric subjectivity, which is a long acknowledged as well as crucial element in the poetics of Petrarch's Canzoniere. The impact of the shipwreck imagery does not end, however, with a collection of vernacular poems. The same mental dynamics, along with a substantial amount of reused lexicon, are present in Book 5 of the Africa. You can see the reuse thanks to the little slide at the end of the passage, which has been compiled by and generously lent for this talk by a colleague of mine, Vance Smith, at Princeton. So the same mental dynamics, I said, and a lot of language that is being reused reappear in the framing similes for Massinissa's soliloquy. I will not read the text again. I'll pause for a sip of water while you read the new translation that you have of those 20-something lines. Unlike what happens in the Canzoniere, this time the nautical metaphoric field is applied to an experiment in third-person psychological exploration and creation. Placed under the sign of the quintessential instability of a lover's mind and designed to set the stage for Massinissa's internal debate, the double nautical simile moves from general to particular, that is, from an account of the internal states of any lover to the surrender to passion of this specific character in the plot. At both levels, the nautical lexicon is notably independent of psychological connectives. While readers are led through a detailed phenomenology of shipwreck, they are given no intimation as to what specific reality in the subject's mental space each element in the metaphor points to. Notwithstanding the apparent close proximity of the two texts, we are far from RVF 189. We are far from Passa la nave mia. We know that the shifting tides belong to the soul at the beginning of the first part. And we know that the young king's mind is a total wreck, it's a total shipwreck, okay? But we are told nothing else, nothing more than that. So the relative higher autonomy in the deployment of nautical language may be indicative of two factors. I'm going to analyze them. One, first factor. While the circulation of material between the Latin and the vernacular text is evident to the point that it may appear as a case of self-translation, the internal logic of the simile is radically different. If Petrarch's epic and lyric poetry, along with his analytical prose, exhibit the same material, this is because of an apparent portability of the nautical metaphor, which is used in different contexts and according to different metaphorical modes to articulate a specific condition of doubt and irresolution. However, whereas in the Canzoniere and Secretum the psychological realities metaphorized are either systematically or occasionally provided, in the Africa, all readers have access to is the nautical side of the shipwreck situation. Not only does the psychological analysis that they are given insist on an external and generic subject, the analysis is also literally, that is, on the level of the letter, not psychological at all. The very mechanism of allegory, to put it bluntly, appears to be marginalized. This ain't an allegory. But there is a second, is and it's not an allegory. There is a second, possibly concurrent factor worth noting. While Petrarch certainly expounds widely on the shipwreck situation in his works, he also seems not to be content with just one metaphoric field to address the diagnosis and definition of the subject's ailment, the acedia, tristitia, egritudo animi, that he studies in his work. If we come back to the Secretum for a final foray into the subject of melancholy, we realize that Petrarch did indeed experiment with another metaphoric system to provide a detailed account of the internal states of his mind. The semantic field that he pointedly adopted there is that of the military siege. The long concluding passage on your handout is part of a dense and vivid exchange between Augustinus and Franciscus, bent on diagnosing the spiritual sickness that affects the latter, Franciscus, so deeply that its name is enough to terrify him. That's how the passage starts. In a span of 2 paragraphs, the internal turmoil of the subject unfolds as a particularly detailed psychomachia. It's a battle in the mind. Each block of text offers a specific approach to the analysis of the situation. The first one, which addresses a direct question from Augustinus on the role of fortune in Franciscus' egritudo animi, mobilizes two interconnected metaphors, that of the arx rationis, the citadel of the mind, and that of fortune, siege of it. The second one consists in a similetic account of the particular implements used in and situations created by a siege. The lexicon of war dominates both blocks. In the first one, however, internal states of mind and metaphoric war situations are connected. The citadel is specifically the citadel of the mind. The hosts that fortune amasses to terrify Franciscus are specifically the miseries of human condition, along with the memory of my past struggles. In the second paragraph, on the contrary, no correspondences are spelled out. After the velut conjunction, which opens up a speculative similetic situation, the text provides no indication of what the innumerable enemies are, nor to what internal states of mind the approaching siege machines or the tunnels being dug under the walls correspond to. Similarly undefined are the towers, the battlements, the walls, and the wooden structures which are attacked by ladders, shielded battering rams, and fire, respectively. You see the structure. Structure is really balanced, but it's all about the war. The internal states are instead paramount in the very last sentence. Here, the indefinite subject of the simile sees the swords and the grin of the enemies, reflects on how close the massacre is, and thus yields to fear and tears. In this threefold articulation, the passage seems to point to the same specifically Petrarchan pattern of gradually elided or bypassed allegorical interconnection between literary imagery and mental states. 6 o'clock. Let me add one last observation about the varied phenomenology of allegorical psychological construction, one which will take us to the conclusion of this talk, promised. Petrarch most likely drew the rich lexicon of siege warfare not only from his lived experience. It is possible that this page in the Secretum was actually written when Petrarch was in the besieged city of Padua in 1345. So it was something real out there. But also from his early and continuing work as editor of Livy's History of Rome, where sieges and military actions did indeed abound. Hence, his insistence on detailing the various siege engines and the effects on a city's defense might be read as a vindication of the importance of this specific cultural endeavor of his. Petrarch, the classicist, is saying, you know, I can do Livy, you cannot, you don't have enough Livy. Petrarch's adoption of this metaphoric system as an articulated descriptor of his internal states of mind, however, may also be seen as his attempt to move away from the traditional schematics of the shipwreck. For a psychological allegory to work, one needs a readership trained in not just perceiving its presence, but also understanding the cultural nuances of individual redeployments, as I have suggested by looking at Dante and Boccaccio's shipwrecks. Petrarch may have realized that such familiarity with an interpretive tradition and its mechanisms was, however, not fully suitable for the different strategy of psychological construction that he was pursuing. Moving thus not precipitously but pedescensum, as Petrarch puts it, into the realm of speculation, I would like to leave you with the idea that perhaps Petrarch found the nautical metaphoric system he had inherited somewhat strained and overused, and he reached out for a new and alternative system, both through the strategic separation of comparans from comparanda that he pursued in his Latin works, and through the imagery and language of the siege, rather than that of navigation. In this case, but it often is the case in Petrarch, new meant old. It meant Livy rather than Augustine, or Aquinas, or Jerome. It meant Virgil rather than Fulgentius or Bernard. And most importantly, it meant philology rather than scholastic theology or Neoplatonic allegory. If this is the case, if really Petrarch was doing something different in his Latin work, one may be able to appreciate why the generation of humanists who followed him, like Erasmus or Leon Battista Alberti, did not mock, did not antagonize Petrarch's brand of psychological shipwrecks, as they did with other traditional allegorizations when they wrote about their own imagined or experienced shipwrecks in their dialogues or intercanales. But this story, that of humanistic shipwrecks and the anthropological discourse subtending them, it's really a story for another day. For today, I have reached my port. Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me with this? Okay, good.
Put
Good.
plenty of meat on the fire, as we say. So there's plenty of time, too, now for discussion and questions. I
mean,
guess we're supposed to...
You're supposed to sit. Okay.
I always
Okay.
wanted to have
Oh. I feel like a...
a format.
Yeah.
Who wants to start us off?
This is the fun part. Yes.
Yeah, very. Here, hold it.
So I'm sorry that this isn't about the fantastic thing you threw us at the end that is so interesting, but it's just about a detail. So you mentioned the Aeneid, book 6,
Yes.
and then somebody, che si siede al governo, so a timoniere, somebody at the, and then I noticed the word fluctus in this Africa, and it made me think of somebody that I don't think appeared in your talk, who in book 6 says, nunc me fluctus habet versantque in litore venti, who's Palinurus.
Yes.
But is he a shipwreck in this sense, or are you talking about a semantic field that involves a different kind of vessel, a different kind of disaster, a different kind of way of sailing, or is Palinurus, does he fit in your world here?
Well, thank you. He doesn't. He is the one who is actually being quoted in Book 5. So the quotation that Petrarch uses at the beginning of the passage, "Oh, I will never trust this monster," meaning fortune, meaning life. Life at sea is life in the hands of fortune. Fortune is a monster. I will never trust the monster. I think it's Palinurus himself. So it's really true that he actually is then appearing as a shipwrecked person in Book 6. Now, one of the underlying arguments of the whole project for me is to try and balance allegorical experiences of allegorical conceptualizations of the shipwreck, and at the same time an extremely careful realism that is being constructed by both Dante, Boccaccio, and I would even say Petrarch. Dante has the shipwreck metaphorization for Guido, and it's 2 lines, 3 lines, 5 lines, but then has the beautiful, incredibly gratuitous beginning of Arsenal de Veneziani simile, which does have which invites an experiential sense of shipwrecks and of navigation. The same thing happens in Boccaccio, which, at the same time in which he explores or evokes paradigms from classical literature, also says within the story that we all know what happens when people shipwreck. We all know, we have experience of that. So you have one experience that is from life and one experience that is from literature. I think your point actually speaks to this in Petrarch. And I will quote you, and I will use this in writing, because Palinurus is both someone who can talk about the sea as something allegorizable, but also someone who actually does founder and die. Yes, so
I'm glad.
It's beautiful.
I'm glad
Thank you.
Barry brought up Palinurus, because it's really a signature trope of Petrarch's repeatedly and several times in the Secretum letters. Interesting, as in 189, that it's Palinurus who has not yet shipwrecked.
Yeah.
It's Palinurus who's on the waves, and always in Petrarch it has the same play, Almighty God, deliver me. That's the solution. That's the only solution. It's a very interesting contrast with Dante, where Palinurus is shipwrecked, is wrecked. I think it's important for 189, because also in 189, the end of the poem says, I've just begun to despair of port. In other words, he's not shipwrecked there either. And this is really a characteristic Petrarchan situation. I want to come back to what I wanted to hear more about that wasn't, because I think Petrarch has a solution for that difficulty, but there are other comments.
You see why I brought 189 here, because I knew there was someone here who's invested in 189.
I have Beatrice. Maybe we go back and forth between students and colleagues. Beatrice is graduate student in Italian, and Gregor.
Thank you so much. I was curious if in your work you deal with the potential shipwreck in the beginning of Paradiso, o voi che siete in piccioletta barca.
Yes.
And also, I was very interested in the comparison between childbirth and the shipwreck. And you mentioned the sponge. There's both in Boccaccio and in Dante,
Yeah.
this liminal image.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could say more about that.
Ok, o voi che siete in piccioletta barca. Ok. Standard disclaimer at the beginning of the talk was, there are three common ways of allegorizing, using nautical language to allegorize situations. The three situations are existential experience, life as navigation, politics, the ship of state, and writing. Now, the standard disclaimer that I cut was, in my talk, I will not talk about the other two, but I'll refer to them because they do connect in certain moments with the existential one. So that the piccioletta barca, voi che siete in piccioletta barca, disclaimer, Dante's disclaimer, is one of those cases which you have an imbrication of the writing, because there we are following his own vessel, che cantando barca, so we are following the writing of the poem, and we are told we should go back to our school desks and study before doing that. And we have both the existential and the writing imbricated with one another. Dante is funny because I think everybody, both Petrarch, Dante, and Boccaccio, are not sea people. They're not seafaring people. They don't go out on the sea. I mean, someone
Tuscan.
here. I mean, yeah, they're Tuscan.
Florentine, they have no water.
They have no water.
They don't get to the sea.
They don't trust the Arno. They don't trust the sea. When Petrarch starts writing about his journey, someone in this room edited and commented that text beautifully. Journey to pilgrimage to a Holy Land. He says, I'm going to send you the book, and the book is going to be just like the journey. I'm not going to take the journey, and this is it. So he's not entrusting his life to the sea. Really, none of them has deeply committed, but they all think through those terms. Now, the sponge. The sponge is, the sea sponge is actually the reason why I wrote the Boccaccio chapter, because, yeah, Picciol Fanciullo, it could be a neat and nice simile, but once you sort of stumble upon such a close relation with Dante, with the cantos and with the lecture on embryology, I think you cannot dispense, from giving its due. There's another thing there. The embryology lesson by Statius is, as you all know, in the cantos of gluttony. And the closest friend and glutton friend of Dante is Forese Donati. And you remember that Dante doesn't recognize Forese at the beginning, and then he has a one-liner that says, "Ravvisò la faccia di Forese." Now, "ravvisò la faccia" is exactly the same language that is used by Boccaccio. So Boccaccio really wants us to think Dante in those terms. Why the sponge is so incredibly interesting? Because it's an intermediate state. Dante's passage is amazingly complex, but one thing that it seems to me it does is always imbricating each status, the ensoulment as a plant, the ensoulment as an animal, the ensoulment as a human being. All three ensoulments are always mediated and by intermediate creatures, and the sponge is one of them. So I'm really intrigued by that, but that is
Gregor, pass it forward.
a wonderful, wonderful theme.
Thanks a lot for the beautiful lecture. I would like to go a little bit into art history, and hopefully not too far away, but actually to Rome, or rather the Vatican. I was thinking about the Navicella mosaic of Giotto,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
I probably don't need to say more, but
No,
yeah.
tell me what you want to what you want to say.
I think it's a major point of reference.
It is.
It is,
Yeah.
right, commissioned for the whole year, 1300.
Yes.
And from there on, in Florence, they take up the motif. It's a very expressionate picture. If we look at the apostles in there, it's of course not really well maintained. And what we see
No,
today
no, there's
is
nothing.
just
I mean, at this point, there's nothing. But we
baroque,
know
but
how
yeah.
how it was. Yes, yes.
But
yes,
I was
indeed.
wondering if
Yes,
that could
it's-
count in, and it's a reinforcing
It's
argument.
it's part
Yeah.
of the it's part of the book. Yes.
Yeah.
I need to write a talk about that I'm going to give in July in Rome, exactly, on Dante as a tourist, and that is the key point of that talk. It is contained all. I mean, the whole theme is all contained in my allusion to the keys, because the papal keys are linked by pontiff seals to the moment in which Peter leaves the bark, the navem. Tu reliquisti navem accipe clavem. So this is on the papal seal. You who left out of faith, you left the ship, now get the keys. And the navem clavem rhyme is extremely important for Boniface. I think Dante is cursing at Boniface also through the allusion to that Giotto-inspired mosaic. Yes, thank you.
I'm going to make
Let's
myself
talk.
useful.
We'll talk more.
I'm going to make myself useful so I can complete the Johnny Carson imitation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this rich lecture. So my question is simple, but I also have a kind
I
of...
fear simple questions. I really fear simple questions.
Okay, so I'm not going to set you up, so I'll tell you also the part that I'm interested in. I wondered if you think as well about what causes shipwrecks. And I'm interested in whether you've reflected as well on the concept of desire. So I was looking in some of the citations that you've given us, and they speak quite clearly and loudly. I mean, Dante,
Yeah.
le vele delle mondane operazioni, in some of these, the Gaudium Mundi in the Tabula Exemplorum. Obviously, those are quite broad categories.
Yeah.
To go a little further, why desire? I was thinking about the sirens and Ulysses' journey.
Beautiful. Now,
What causes
but
shipwreck?
I will not go there, but I will engage the desire question. I won't go there in public. We can talk about that, and I don't have my playing a chess game here. I don't have my pieces well laid out for that question. But desire, yes, desire is essential. I can't remember, I'm quoting someone, I can't remember who the authority is, but there's someone that says, children make us hostages to fortune. Is it Donne, John Donne? No? Children make us hostages to fortune. Never heard this? No? Okay. Sorry, I thought it was, this is what Bob Hollander told me when I told him that that we were expecting a baby, and he said, children make us hostages to fortune. I said, well, like congratulations, that I would have led with that, but I accept this. I don't think that Boccaccio would say the same. I think that Boccaccio would say that desire makes us hostages to fortune. So the imbrication of desire and fortune is incredibly important. Desire as avarice, desire as greed. This is Landolfo's motor engine. Desire also appears in an uncanny place in Dante, when in one of those metaphors of, because Dante talks in the Convivio about himself wanting to write the poem. He's ready to launch the ship of his treatise, and he says, I'm moved by desire. The wind is the desire of writing that propels me. So desire is absolutely central. I would associate it to wind, thanks to Dante, and to fortune, thanks to Boccaccio. Now, we can talk about Petrarch, because that's a very unstable wind for Petrarch. His desire is moving in two different directions at the same time. But we can continue on that. Thank you. That's really cool.
Thank you very much for the wonderful lecture. I have a question that's actually pretty closely related to Rebecca's question about the causes of shipwrecks. I was particularly interested in this clause in the quotation from the Decameron, from the Landolfo story, O piacer di Dio o forza di vento che il facesse, which, I mean, recalls to mind the way he also frames the cause of the plague, but also the Come altrui piacque from Inferno 26.
Whoa.
So I do wonder if in your research on shipwrecks, whether you've drawn distinctions as well between shipwrecks that are divinely caused and those that are naturally caused. And furthermore, I've also, I mean, as a kind of secondary question, I'm also curious if among the sources that you've been considering, whether the Old Testament figure of Jonah has also featured. Thank you.
Okay. To the first one, I'm interested in demonic sort of triggers for shipwrecks. Shipwrecks that are divinely ordained. You know, you want Jonah, you want Paul. I'll have a chapter on Paul and Paul's shipwreck, quote unquote. It needs to be there. It's the beginning of everything. Also because not the Jonah, but the Paul episode is so rich in technical questions. I mean, this book is dedicated to my uncle who taught me how to sail. When you sail, the first thing you learn is not how to sail, is how to call things. A rope is not a rope. Okay, una scotta non è una corda, una drizza non è una, okay, non è una sagola. There's a vocabulary that comes with it, and it's so important for shipbuilders and ship users to have their language straight. Okay, so I am really intrigued by Paul's shipwreck because it's so important, it's so rich lexically. Jonah is also cool and crucial. I am translating right now the Piscator Within into Italian. Piscator Within is I think it's an 11th century weird little British poem in Latin hexameters about Pinocchio's story, Geppetto's story, about a fisherman who gets swallowed up by a big monster. It's a whale, and he fights it, and from within, that's why he's called Within. That's his name. Fights it from within and gets out of it, gets freed. So there is a trope there that is popular as well. Okay, so I'm okay with engaging with both. Now, the first part, remind me the first part very quickly of the question. Oh, yes, piacere. Oh, thank you. Come altrui piacque, no, I had not made that connection. Thank you. I'll quote you. You just made yourself, if you want to, you made yourself your way into the apparatus of the book. I am very much intrigued by two resonances in this passage that I gave you. The first is the one that you sort of spelled out, and the other one is compassione. Because umana cosa è avere compassione alla fit is really the beginning of the poem. Now, my teacher, Bob Hollander, taught me don't indulge in episode puffing. So you say, oh, there's no fun, I mean, some more intriguing canto than canto 6. Oh, they say, no, just because you're writing about it, you have no claim, you should not say this. That's canto puffing, that's episode puffing, don't do it. And so I didn't want to do it, but you forced my hand, and so I really think that this little passage revisits, and it's in the voice of one of the narrators, not of the author, revisits statements by the author that are framing for the Decameron. What does it mean that you have in front of you a human being. How do you recognize someone as human? And that is why Palinuro is so important, and that is why compassione is so crucial. Ted, can I do something crazy? Can I have my Dante book back, the red book, the big one? Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna read you, if you don't mind, can I read you 30? I know, but this is so cool. No, so cool, this is terrible. Okay, Canto 3, this is Purgatory 3. The title of the book is, okay, this is the page. Okay, this is Canto 3. And it's called Panim, that's the title of the note. The lines that I'm commenting are Or le bagna la pioggia e muove il vento, di fuor del regno quasi lungo il verde, dove le trasmutò a lume spento. Okay? And I call upon Palinuro, because this is Palinuro, this is Manfredi talking with the same words that Palinuro was using, and Dante is really translating them into Italian. Palinuro said, Nunc me fluctus abet versant in litere venti, and Manfredi goes, Or le bagna la pioggia e muove il vento. And for me, the whole point of this canto is putting us in front of the responsibility of reacting in a human way, in a humane way, in front of human beings. This is a story of someone, Palinuro, who actually made it to land, made it to shore, and that was killed by people on the shore, and in an inhuman act, very, very close, I think, to what is happening now, what we are doing, what some of us are doing, turning the sea into a barrier and the shore into a wall. I mean, that's bad, okay? And it all really depends on, are we able to see the human being in those who are in front of us? Can we read the word homo in somebody's face? Yeah. It's all there, yeah, okay? Please. Sorry, I speak.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you again for this wonderful lecture. I was very interested in the first point about the confession, the first part, and I was wondering if in Dante's poem, this idea of shipwreck and confession is also already present in the allusion that he makes to the shipwreck in the first, paragon in the commedia come quei che con l'ena affanato uscito fuori dal belle because
gallerie.
he is also talking about this passage in a state between selva oscura, smarrire la via, and I don't know if you have thought about that or not. Just that.
I would be really intrigued by it, but I need lexical clinchers, what I call lexical clinchers. I really need a word. I really need a moment. La fiumana ove il mar non ha vanto. It's something that's happening, it's close by. That's a shipwreck with spectator mode, the one that, he's out, is Lucretius, once again. I mean, Lucretius is so incredibly important also for Boccaccio. Lucretius talks about human beings when they're born. It's the end of book 5. They're born, they are like a shipwrecked person. They're naked. They need everything. They cannot sustain themselves. And of course, nobody reads Lucretius. Not completely true, but everybody reads Pliny the Elder, who quotes Lucretius about this, who rephrases Lucretius and adds, it's so great that we all start with crying when the first word that we say is eu, eu. So every human being really is wretched, and you can imagine a contemptus mundi sort of tradition. It has a field day with this. So it's there, it is there. But I'm not ready to go there yet. because there's no confessional, explicit for me, confessional language that could help me do that. Unless you want to talk about mi ritrovai as a confessional moment.
For example, the confession that the present of the
Okay. Then we can dance. Now we can dance. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Let's talk. Let's talk. It's intriguing. Thank you, really. Thank you. Yes.
Hi. So my question is about fortune, obviously. So they're very connected, and it's a big topic. But if you could talk a little bit about that, I think the iconography of the shipwreck and Saldinoni on the plank reminds me a lot of the Wheel of Fortune and those who are going down with it, that are holding the wheel very tightly.
Oh, true.
And so
Thank you.
I thought about that connection, and so, but yeah, it's obvious they're obviously connected. But
Right.
if we could talk a little bit about that.
Right. I like that. I really like it. I never thought about that. Also because for me, thinking in terms, I mean, my engagement with fortune is mostly beginning with Boccaccio and then moving a little bit into Petrarch. I don't do fortune in Dante. I think he's doing something different. But I may now, bring fortune also to Dante. And I'm interested in rock bottom, usually, and the rock bottom for Landolfo is the final shipwreck. Really, he has lost everything at that point. He's really doesn't know that he has also gained something good, but he has lost everything. So, and in the rock bottom, there's no holding. There's really just you're floating there. There's not even any sense that you could go back up. So in the Wheel of Fortune. But I like the idea that the plank may be part of the balancing moments. So the regnavi and the regnabo, the two moments of, once I was powerful, and I'll be powerful again. Okay. Yeah, of course. Then we go down, we fall down again. It's Sisyphean in a way, but thank you. I like that. I like the
Let's continue over some refreshment, and please join me in thanking Simone for.
You want to say something?
Yeah.